Hello, everybody. Welcome to Anderson Ranch and our summer faculty lecture series. I'm Emil Gorman, and I'm the studio coordinator of digital fabrication here at Anderson Ranch. I'm thrilled that we'll be hearing from both Roberto Juarez and Andrew Ross tonight. I want to welcome our virtual participants watching tonight, as well as our Board of Trustees and National Council. Thank you for your support. Before we begin, please take a moment to silence your cell phones. I would also like to remind everyone to attend the ranch-wide orientation right here in Schirmer Hall tomorrow morning at 8:45 a.m. I want to start by recognizing that Anderson Ranch campus resides on the traditional ancestral territory of the Ute people who called the Roaring Fork Valley and beyond home for over 800 years. Through our mission to promote a wide range of arts, cultures, and voices, we commit to partner with and honor the indigenous ancestors and residents of the sacred land where we learn, work, and create. Tonight's program will consist of 2 faculty lectures followed by a brief Q&A. First, it's a pleasure to introduce Roberto Juarez. Roberto Juarez is a painter, printmaker, and public artist who exhibits in New York City and nationally. His public work can be found at Grand Central and the Miami Airport. His work is included in the collections of the Metropolitan Museum, Whitney Museum, Denver Art Museum, and LACMA. Please join me in welcoming Roberto.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back to Anderson Ranch, one of my favorite places to come and be in the summer and early fall. So in this short presentation today, I'm going to start with a film that was made by public television in Albany about my studio as a way to introduce my process and what I do and where I do it. So we'll start with the film.
I'm here at the studio of Roberto Juarez to get a behind-the-scenes look at the pineapples and pigs featured in his current work. Let's go.
I'm a painter, a printmaker, an artist. I make large-scale paintings for public buildings. I paint in my studio for exhibitions and galleries. I keep everything and make collages out of them and use them as source materials for larger paintings. So little to big is, I think, the thing I love doing. So Matt, these are the collages I make in my studio almost daily. And from this little collage that was made in 2018, I made this painting a couple days ago that is one of the newest works in the room. So you can see how the design of this collage gets translated to a larger picture. I always knew I was going to be an artist, even as a child. In fact, as a child, I would draw constantly, and my parents didn't really support it. There wasn't a lot of art in the house, so I figured out that if I drew under tables and under chairs, no one would find them. And so that's where it was my secret place to draw and paint. In 7th grade, I was taken to the Art Institute for the first time in Chicago. Mrs. Sundale, my art teacher, took us to see Van Gogh paintings, and it changed my life. I was, this little kid, but I knew that that was the important thing that I cared about. I'm painting these paintings that I call in my grandmother's front yard because of these images of the pineapple and the pig. Once I printed them on Chinese paper, I started remembering the first time I saw her front yard. And I was probably 12, had never left Chicago, and there was a gigantic pig tied to a mango tree in the front yard of my grandmother. And her kitchen was on the porch, so she would cook outside, and it was just a different world. It opened my whole idea of who I was and what could be out there. As a kid, it's a fond memory, it's a warm memory. And so once I saw this, I thought, okay, I'm here, I'm gonna be playing in my grandmother's backyard, or front yard, so to speak. And that gave me an extra kind of joy of working. So what I do is I print on the Chinese paper these images and gather them and give them different sgraffito and different textures. This is a horse brush for like brushing horses, and it was given to me as a gift, and I never knew what to use it for because it's kind of too coarse for the kind of marks I make on canvas, but it's perfect for printing. I'll show you. And then I start painting on the underpainting. Underpaintings are made in my process by collaging small collages, and that's how I work out the dynamic of what I want to say visually. And once I have that, I blow it up. And then on top of that, I started adhering these pigs and pineapple. And then what happens in that interface, I respond to with my own painting, my own tearing, my own drawing on top of it, so that it becomes one. I also do public work. I do gigantic murals for mostly courthouses. I did a federal courthouse in Fort Pierce, Florida. We're in the room where it was painted. And it is a 20-foot tall by 10-foot stretched piece of linen. They were kind of surreal in a sense because there were flowers from above ground all underwater. And there were microscopic kind of life living with these flowers. And there were two sides to this gigantic entryway. One side was nature, and that was the painting you saw as you left because it helped kind of bring you back into the world. And on the other side of the wall, as you approached or entered the building, you saw this kind of more abstract idea of culture. So it was culture and nature together. To be able to be given a piece of architecture like the courthouse and say, what and how could art affect this space? And part of it is the psychology of space, what is happening with the people who enter the space, and that's the challenge. Grand Central Station was the perfect example of that. It was a pivotal or important point in my career because I was a young artist. I was competing with like these big names for this very kind of sought after commission, and there was a tie, so to speak, and they couldn't decide between me and this other artist. And a friend of mine who's a prominent artist, came in and said, give the kid a chance. And they did. It's about kind of comforting, cloistering the passengers, the travelers in this smaller room inside of this cathedral of travel, which is Grand Central, which I love. It was historic, and it's still there. In this latest work, which is in the room right now, there's a lot of vibrant color, and I think that's a need for some kind of excitement and joy that I wasn't feeling from the outside world right now. The pandemic has been a little hard on me. It took me work to start to work again, and once I started to work, I didn't want to be dreadful in what I was saying or doing. I wanted to enjoy my life again and not worry about living or dying or the politics of the moment. I really wanted to create like an oasis or a place that I could go that had these feelings from my past. And so I think the colors speak to that. They're very bright. There's not a lot of pastels or soft tones. They're very graphic and not pop, but almost pop. I often wonder, what do people do who don't do art? I mean, it's so part of my everyday. It gives me life, and I love sharing what I can share in art. I mean, that's part of the whole process, not just the making, it's wonderful, but when you put it out in the world, like what we have in Pittsfield now, people respond, and it's something they want to see right now, and it makes me feel like I have a purpose, which I do. I mean, I think it's real. It's a real purpose. Okay, so now I'm going to come up to date. That's a few years ago, and show you some of the more recent work and what has been happening. My life in 7 minutes. Isn't that funny? So during COVID, which we started talking about, I discovered a crate of large works on paper from the 80s. And I started showing my colleagues and friends in New York, and there was interest, but nothing was really happening until an Italian curator, but more a impresario of opera, came to the studio and he said, "This is amazing. We have to show this. This is important work." And so he called his friend at the Palazzo Gallery in Brescia, Italy, and they got very excited and they shipped everything over. And within 3 months, they were up on the walls. So it was a quick thing. And it's a period of work from when I was young and had a lot of energy to try to deal with everything in the world. And it's kind of exciting for me to see now. There's a lot of themes of sexuality, family, religion, gender. There's a lot of issues that I'm not that involved with right now in my work, but because they're very current in the art world today, there was a lot of interest for this work. And this book was written by Fabio, the curator. And this is Fabio in the studio upstate. I paint and work upstate Canaan, New York, about 3 hours north of New York City. And this is him selecting work for Venice. And from Brescia, it went to Venice, and we did a show at this, another palazzo, but it was a crumbling haunted house palazzo, that's it, the Palazzo Tiepolo. And it was so atmospheric and a wonderful way to bring this work out. And this is even earlier, from 1975, when I was painting on boxes and products. Here's St. Mark on a crumbling wall. And, you know, it was done not thinking at all of Venice, but once St. Mark came to Venice, he didn't want to leave. It was he found home. Amore was painted in the Dominican Republic, in a residency there. Oh. And most recent paintings. And here, the subject matter is loosely inspired by Peruvian textiles. And the figures do come from Peruvian textiles. And I just found them as kind of in your face as things that I had done in the 80s. And so by looking at my work from the 80s, it reignited the kind of interest I had in sexuality and beans and pattern and a lot of paper. This is Japanese paper on acrylic paint, and that's what we're working on in the workshop here this week. Again, a mixed media on canvas, loosely inspired by Peruvian weaving, but it's more spontaneous. I mean, I will look at a lot of things, and then when I finally start to work, it comes out of me spontaneously. It's not like I'm following a pattern or a design. It's interacting of shapes and colors immediately. So it's like a dance. This one's really cut off, so I'm going to just skip it. Another weaving-inspired piece. So I think one of the things that's very obvious to me looking at these large is that drawing is as important as painting in the work, and paper as important as canvas. And in terms of subject matter, you know, there is no real necklace, but the things are dangling, and it reminded me of jewelry and what jewelry does on a body. And again, there's rice paper, acrylic paint, and pretty bold marks. I mean, the newest work that's in the studio now is even bolder than this. It's almost like abstract expressionism at this point, but there's a lot of color, interaction. And they become fairly abstract. I mean, this is not a clock, but it's like a clock. It's like a head, but it's not a head. It's a painting. And this will be shown at the National Gallery of Design in New York this fall. They're doing a show to commemorate 200 years of the Academy, and the theme is Who's America? And Puerto Rican is part of my background. I'm Mexican and Puerto Rican. And so this is after the COVID paintings, but relating to those experiences I was speaking about. And that's it. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Roberto. It is an honor to introduce Andrew Ross. Andrew Ross is an artist working within the intersections of assemblage sculpture and digital imaging. He received his BFA from the Cooper Union and attended Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. Ross has exhibited in group exhibitions at the Hessel Museum, the Drawing Center, the Studio Museum in Harlem, Artist Space, and Green Naftali. He has staged solo exhibitions at Kai Matsumiya, Fine Arts Gallery, Signal, American Medium, Clima, and False Flag. Please join me in welcoming Andrew.
Thank you, Emil, and thank you, Anderson Ranch, for having me for the second year in a row. Excuse me if I stumble. I'm getting over the altitude right now. But so what you should know about me, I guess, to start would be that I'm known to be very eclectic in my materiality. I could say that I've had many art practices over the years, but I would also say that my work is more idea-driven and process-driven. I make my own processes. And I think that I'm partly influenced by my upbringing, being a child of several diasporic communities, and I've always been interested in how thingness relates to diasporic communities. I've been, for many years, interested in the way that I've noticed objects get reused and decontextualized by people entering new spaces or being infiltrated by new spaces. And that's where I began. It's not where I'm at right now, is dealing with that idea. Where I'm at right now is I'm thinking a lot about sculpture and event. I think many of us probably can imagine that a sculpture is like an event. If you, think about monuments and think about commemoration. But going beyond that, I'm thinking lately about how events are often defined by objects. That an object must be there for an event. Not every object is around for an event, or not every occasion is an event. Like waking up isn't always an event. So I'm looking for these moments where events are unexpected, where things that are commonplace become events. And so this is a series of sculptures that was just made this year. The paintings in the background are by an artist named Donna Nelson. This is at Thomas Urban Gallery. And I'm dealing with my two convergent impulses here. One, to use commonplace objects, and two, to misuse them in a kind of like event-object hybrid. And lately I've been really interested in simulating movement, both by constructing it out of clay, kind of in a way similar to the futurists or the surrealists. Think Duchamp's Nude Descending a Staircase, or Umberto, what's his name? It'll come to me. Boccioni's sculpture, famous futurist sculpture. So what I've been doing is making simulated movement in digital modeling programs and combining them with 3D scanned clay approximations of that movement. And so I'll take a clay model that kind of encapsulates the movement that I'm going for, and I'll plop it onto a animated environment to output a sculpture. And in this way, I find myself both creating events and defining events, especially if I'm using source material, similarly to the way that the objects that are of note are quotidian objects like bed, chair, ladder. I'm interested in found video material as well. So this series was from found backyard wrestling videos. And I've done a couple of projects where I take things where people are creating scenarios, creating scenes, creating tableaus of objects, and in a way that's not necessarily supposed to be artistic, and recontextualizing it for my artwork. And I also sometimes really indulge in why. It doesn't always have to be important why, but in this case, I do find this to be relevant to the way our lives are now, and the way television dominates our lives, that they're emulating what they see on television in these videos, the way, the fact that Trump has been on WWE, for example, which is what they're emulating here. So in a way, I'm emulating movement, and I'm emulating from other people's emulations. Sometimes I make things from scratch too. This is not actually. This is also from source imagery, but I'm interested in abstraction. Ultimately, I think some of the keen-eyed people who I've talked to about my work, rather than seeing it as eclectic, I've heard people say that I'm interested in form, and I would agree that I'm trying to find what is form. If I follow my logic down to its end, that objects are in some ways define events, and but I don't want to make monumental things that are too specific events, and I would like to make something new, then I must make an object that is like an event, that is like becoming or changing, So I look for moments where things are becoming and changing. So this is a moment based off of this photo of comedian and activist Dick Gregory, who went on several hunger strikes and afterwards became very known for his weight loss and used that to promote a weight loss regimen. Again, like the wrestling scenario, I find this to be very timely and poignant. Not that it always has to be, but thinking about the transition from one type of influence to over a larger group through demonstration to an influence over a small groups through coaching, I find to be interesting and something uniquely sculptural to talk about, because especially with my process, I get to turn things over from one form to another. I make it out of clay, I scan it, I make it out of wood now, then I make it out of resin, and so on and so forth. And each time I make it, it changes. And so when I'm searching for moments that I feel, especially lately, these are very recent pieces, by the way. This piece is called Individuals. It's from 2024. All the pieces that I showed before were 2025. And this is on the right is an installation I made of it in progress that kind of has a diagram of the artworks that led me to this thought, including Giacometti and Botero, the skinny and the fat sculptors. But my sculptures involve lots of transformations, and the transformations allow me to look for moments that are not black and white, and therefore I'm teasing out the content from them, and emotive content, I guess. And this work and the previous work, Individuals, was from a show. I think the title is relevant to what I just said. It was called Cursed Leadership, and it was a series of works where I was exploring this theme of wanting to lead a certain way and then pivoting in some way. And this is, I guess, less a pivot and more of like a representation of a curse. This is a piece called loup-garou, which is the French word for werewolf. And it's sort of dealing with, it's also the same word in Creole, and dealing with that myth and how it's passed down. And I made this loup-garou into a sawhorse that's also a figure, so it's constantly becoming. But I was interested in this figure because it's like a diminutive power, to be cursed with something like being a werewolf. This piece was similar. You know, a lot of these works, I guess I've been going back and forth, glossing over the process, deal with, making something out of clay and combining it with commonplace things. So I am doing that in 3D modeling programs. So I'm thinking a lot about elasticity and simulation as well. I should have mentioned that a lot of the cloths that have been in the work shown were simulated cloths digitally. So I'm also looking at animation history and how it relates to my content. And I couldn't help with this piece, which is called Be Right. It's also from 2024, to kind of ruminate on lions in the history of abstraction in animation, and the concept of the circle of life from The Lion King. So it's another kind of representation of diminutive power, that this figure gives life by dying. So it's a planter with these weeds growing out of it. So, I was glossing over, but I didn't mention a lot of the titles, but a lot of my titles are puns or portmanteaus, I guess would be a more correct statement. They're multiple things combined into one word, and so I'm sometimes going back and forth between wanting to make up my forms entirely and wanting to find them. So with the puns and the portmanteaus, I've been thinking a lot about jokes and how jokes are somewhat like fleeting relationships, and how, you know, sometimes we're using them to make things seem permanent. So I've been playing with those as these sort of dreamlike logic of jokes with some of these works. This is a piece called Attractor, and it's like a play on words, like I'm attracted to a tractor. And it's a tractor arm next to this this kind of tree that it's clawed. But there's a lot of cloth going on in the next few works I'm going to show. This is, believe it or not, another 3D modeling exploration. I've been playing with taking, because 3D models are essentially hollow shells, so taking those shells and printing them out and cutting them up into sewing patterns. But I'm looking at fabric in lots of different ways, mostly for its ability to be simulated in a digital environment, literally to make something happen, to make an event. You know, think any superhero movie lately with like a superhero flying with a cape, or really any movie lately with has some CGI in it. But I have been. It's one of the ways that I've been exploring this idea of sculpture or object as an event, is simulating things on them digitally. So, for example, this piece, which is called Fight Loop, was digitally sculpted, and the arm was a cloth simulation, meaning it was just a tube that got pushed up digitally and output into this cloth. I was thinking of it as a cartoon David, almost like David and Goliath, and how that relates to the event, because David is always holding the slingshot before the event. And I remembered this moment with Bugs Bunny that, you know, that he would get mad and roll up his sleeve like it's like a weapon. And I've been working with all these different ways of making cloths that are also arrangements of objects. This is called Pig's Plaid Half Drop on the left and Powder on the right. They're 3D scanned and 3D constructed objects that are UV printed onto wood. So the wood is real, but everything else is simulated. And although they feel three-dimensional. These works are from 2023, and the last works around that time. Yeah, dealing with treating objects to some of the sculptures from this time. I have been exploring sculpture as event for a while, and I think of abstract expressionism as a kind of representation of an event. And I'm interested in the zeitgeist of the forms that I'm using as a type of event. These are sort of found digital sculptures. They're found 3D models that I cut up and rearranged. And also, I've been working with hollowness to literally make objects that are events. And I will stop at this last hollow sculpture. It's called Hollow Man with Rubber Boots. So this is from 2017. I've really just shown mostly recent works that deal with simulation to create events, but this is sort of the threshold, the turning point, where I knew I was still working with photographic imagery to make sculpture, you know, especially something that works from one angle but maybe falls apart on another angle. But I'm also playing with the sculpture as sight. So this one's very literal. Literally, it's a figure with another figure coming out of it, so the sculpture is a sight for that figure. It's from an era of my practice where I was very interested in the transcendently obvious. You know, obviously it becomes a kind of representation of a potential interiority, yet it is also a formal language of literally placing one figure on top of another. So my projects go back and forth between that sort of poetic language and that physical language. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you.